Right then, Richard, we've got four books I think we each want to talk about. Interestingly, we haven't had one book that we both read and comparing our views on, but I think this time we're just talking about stuff that's piqued our interest in one way or another. And my first choice is something from many, many years ago. This is called Reminiscences of an Ex-Detective. It was published in the 1930s, well, I think 1920s, by a gentleman called Francis Carlin, who joined the Metropolitan Police as a 19-year-old, retired at the age of 56, having reached the rank of superintendent, and then wrote a book reminiscing about his years. And I love it because to me it's doing what books do. It's telling a story, it's someone's personal reminiscences, it's of a time, it's of a place that we've moved well beyond. I've made some notes here. It's fact that reads like fiction. And I see it's recording a slice of history and yeah, just recounting an age that we don't have. And it's about policemen. And I can use the term policemen because I did a little bit of research. And the first female police officer was not inducted, was not recruited, was not given powers of arrest until 1916. And that was in Grantham. Sorry, 1915. And then the Metropolitan Police didn't introduce female police officers until 1919. So, Mr. Carlin's career uh, covered a time when there was no such thing as a female police officer. And it's just lovely phrases here. Scotland Yard has been called in the case. There are few people in Britain who have not at one time or another reacted to the thrill of reading those words. And then he talks about when he started, when he set out as a young police officer. He joined at 19 and spent 2 weeks being trained in court evidence procedure before becoming a fully fledged man in blue. And then he talks about one of his early encounters with the wrong-uns, which I think he actually does call criminals at one stage. But he talks about, I spotted a man one night stealing a watch from another individual. I made to seize him, but before I well knew what had happened, a number of others, of the kind who are always agin the police, had pounced on me, and I was ignominiously knocked out. When I recovered, my physical hurts were of very minor importance to me compared with my chagrin at having been worsted in my first effort at thief catching.
Thief catching. That's a nice phrase.
Yeah, just, and he the book is a collection of kind of short stories. You can dip in and out of it at will. But we've got chapters called The Bogus Count's Love Affairs, The Brixton Taxicab Murders, which you can almost see as being a Rumpole of the Bailey episode.
That's uh,
Doris,
that's a that's a reference I don't get, I'm afraid.
what, Rumpole of the Bailey?
Yeah, yeah. I've
Oh,
no. Is it a TV program?
yes. Probably, yeah, I suppose late 70s, early 80s.
Oh,
So
no, I wasn't
it's
around.
it's being rerun in lots of the little channels. If you can catch, it's lovely. It's at a time when TV was good. It was a nine
Yeah.
o'clock. It was a 9 o'clock, so it was peak time. And I don't think we'd make anything like that anymore, because it's about a barrister. Horace Rumpole was a barrister, and it does get quite technical legalese at time. Um, but going back to Mr. Carlin, he's got another Doris Keane's necklace. I haven't read that yet, but I just think it's a love and tracking the confidence tricksters. It's just a lovely book, and I've picked one little passage, which I again I just think the language, the description, In a desperate case, I may just mention that it would have been possible for me as Superintendent of Scotland Yard to instruct the traffic policeman to let my taxi across. Tubes are troublesome. I have known a man who was aware he was being followed, wait until the lift gate was about to close, and then dash in just in time to be the last person. In that instance, I made for the stairs, which I took four at a time. I did pick up my man in the platform, but in many cases, the clever crook will leave the detective waiting for the next lift while he, the crook, goes down and makes a dash for the stairs, which he is mounting while the detective is going down in the lift.
All
And
right.
I just thought, that's making such a big thing of, stairs. And how many times do we see in detective programs, you somebody ducks into the lift and, the policeman will look at the lift and look at the stairs and I just love it. It's a super, super book. Still available on Amazon. Obviously not the original, but it's always been
Is that
republished.
one that the copy you've got? Is that an original copy?
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is well, I don't know if it's first edition, but it's certainly. I can't find the date on it, but you can tell by the paper. It's
Yeah, even the cover when you're showing it.
yes, and there is Mr. Carlin himself. And
He looks like someone. I'm trying to think who he looks like.
but he was apparently quite famous because obviously at the time he joined the police, uh, it wasn't as it was, and he was the first ever superintendent in the Metropolitan Police.
I was going to say that when you're talking about the dates, I was thinking that must be the infancy of Scotland Yard
Yep,
when he
it was.
joined, or certainly I can't have been around for more
Yeah.
than a couple of decades before he. Quite interesting the the sort of tools at their disposal. I imagine if you're reading there's no DNA evidence that how they solved crimes was completely different to how detectives will solve crimes now.
Oh, absolutely. And what comes over in some of the stories is just, the meticulous legwork, the detailed investigations, the talking to people, the being able to tell whether someone's lying to you or not. So I suppose, understanding the human condition. And of course, in that time, police kind of dispensed summary justice. If they found the bounder that they were chasing at the end of a dark alley, then they would think nothing of, you know,
Battering them.
yes.
I'm sure that's still, sure that still goes on today.
But yeah, in many ways, that's how discipline was dispensed, and that's people talk. And I suppose when I was a kid, I was a bit afraid of the local bobbies. Um, Even now, if I'm driving, and even if I'm driving well within the speed limit, if I see a police car, I kind of lift my foot off the accelerator. It's just kind of an instinctive action. Um,
Definitely. I think the most famous sort of Bobby I can think of in literature is what was the one in Oor Willie? PC Murdoch. But yeah, he's a sort of police officer. I always think that with Oor Willie because I used to read the older ones. Like so you'd have like the annuals from the 40s and the 50s and 60s. And it was by the time you get to I don't know if they even still make Oor Willie, but the world is so different that you don't get local police officers like that, but they still publish it. They still
yeah.
write it as if they do.
Well,
Um,
I've been amazed to see that you can still get Commando comics on Readly, which I thought those would have long gone. But not so much Ur Willie, but the Bruins. There was what, seven, eight, nine of them? However many of them there were. And
yeah, yeah. Must have
and
been.
the Bruins were obviously a slightly middle class family because obviously they lived in the tenement flat in Glasgow, but they had a Button Ben, sort
Aye.
of somewhere out in the Highlands. So they would go to the Button Ben. Now, a Button Ben to me has always been like it's a living room and a kitchen and probably a chemical toilet out round the back. But all the Bruins went to the Button Ben and they all had space to sleep. It just didn't quite work for me.
I always thought the Bruins were in Dundee. They said, is it set Glasgow?
very possibly Dundee. I never really.
Maybe because I know Willie was set in a
They,
fictional town, was it not? So
they,
maybe the Bruins was in the same fictional town.
I mean, to me, it was just a Scottish city, and I never really gave a lot of thought to it.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. There's a Viz does a pastiche of the Bruins, and it's called the Bruin Windsors, I think it is. So it's like the royal family, but
Right.
they're all dressed. They're all the Bruins. So like the Queen used to be Maud Bruin, and then Prince William's Willie, and Charles is the kind of like the substitute for Paul Bruin,
Yes.
and most of the time now they use it to take the mick out of Prince Andrew,
Uh,
which is
Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to you, sir.
oh, well, that's it. Yeah, again, he's no longer Prince.
Um, but yeah, as I say, going back to Francis Calvert, I mean, he sadly he died. He was only 59 when he died, only 3 years after retirement. So not an old man. And yeah, as I say, he was quite fundamental in changing the structure of policing in London to the way we know it today. So, someone who made the mark. But I just love the book. I picked it out of the
I was going to
bookcase.
ask, did you get it from the bookshelf?
Yeah,
Kate's bookshelf, isn't it?
it's bookshelves.
Yeah.
So yeah, as I say, I just love it. And the thing it's one of those great books you can dip in and out of it. I've probably been reading it for there's about 13, 14 chapters, and I've probably been picking it up and putting it down for about a year. Because you go and you read one, and then you go and do other stuff, and you're looking for something, not a full novel, or so you pick it up and read another
Aye.
chapter. And as I say, he tells the stories so well.
I was going to say, as a style, how do you find the style? Because we've
As I say,
talked in the
great.
past about yeah,
How was it? I described it to you earlier. It's written in the style of the time, but it doesn't feel old-fashioned. It still feels modern. Um, well, modern, perhaps pushing it a bit too far. But you know how we talked about there was a point at which we were going to have had a look at Tom Jones by Henry Fielding. And then I had a look at that, and I just found the text so dense and very different to what we're used to today, to the extent I thought, no, no, I'm not sure I could wade through this. Whereas this is written in a very inviting way. And I suppose it's cops and robbers. It's that kind of fundamental thing that, 1,000,001 films have been made around cops and robbers and goodies and baddies. And of course, Mr. Carlin always gets his man. I haven't come across a story yet. I've still got a couple to read, but I haven't come across a story yet where the villains got away.
do you
He
think he
always
just yeah just well, he probably just didn't include those ones, did
yeah, exactly. There must have been some.
he?
Um, but yeah, just as I say, he always gets his man. And I love when he talks about, as he progresses through the ranks, and that lovely one. As a superintendent, I could have made the constable stop to let me through, but he seems to have been someone who kind of wasn't conscious of status. He remembered his 4 or 5 years in uniform as a young constable. And when you read about how the stories that touch on how they created, as I say, what we now know as the Met, he obviously remembered a lot of the experiences he'd had, as he describes of being worsted. I think that's lovely. He was knocked unconscious, he was worsted. I've heard people talking about, oh, I was bettered by, but I've never heard someone say I was worsted. And yeah, yeah, all the stories just conjure up these places. There's robberies from hotels, robberies from individuals, and I just love it. It's to me, it's what books are about.
interesting because we haven't discussed the books before we started recording. We hadn't really discussed what books we were both reading. But when you started speaking about that book, it made me really think about one of the books I was reading, and I like that for the exact same reason,
Yeah.
which is like is again we're both quite interestingly both picked non-fiction books. Uh,
Yes,
so
you
the
have
books that
done
I've been
before.
reading, yeah. So I read a couple of books. One of them's the first one I read was it was called The Ringmaster, and it's about Vince McMahon, and that's a biography,
Hmm.
and it's a one that doesn't well, yeah, for rest, it doesn't pull any punches about the character of Vince McMahon, he's still alive, but he's not a particularly nice man.
Is it an authorized biography or
Oh no, 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 no. It goes into a lot of detail.
too
I
much,
actually, a lot
too,
of
too much detail?
yeah. Um, I actually started because I was listening to a podcast. There's this podcast that a lot of people I work with listen to called Behind the Bastards.
Hmm.
And apparently Vince McMahon, so they've done ones on like Henry Kissinger, they do Hitler, all these horrible people from history. Apparently Vince McMahon had more episodes for his podcast than anybody else.
Wow.
So I started listening to the podcast and I couldn't stand it. So the presenters, it just wasn't my idea of a good podcast. It was all the humor was very ironic, and they'd be talking about things that were quite dark, and but then they'd all be having to make jokes, and it was just I didn't enjoy the podcast,
Mhm.
but they kept quoting this book, and then when I got the book and I read that, and the podcast was just pretty much regurgitating the book anyway.
Reading the book.
So I read the book and I got the story without all the ironic humor that wasn't very funny. But that kind of led me on to a bit of a, sometimes when you read a book and then you get into a topic and you want to
Mhm.
read more. So I read Bret Hart's autobiography. So he's still alive. So he's a famous wrestler who I can remember growing up because he was my favorite wrestler.
And a famous
Um,
wrestling family as well, aren't they, the
well,
Hearts?
this is where the most interesting part of the book I found was the early years because his father was Stu Hart and he was a wrestling promoter in Western Canada, coming down maybe into Washington State. But Bret Hart, he tells the story of his childhood and growing up in this world where they would travel 500 mile round trips from Calgary over to like all these little towns because they would do the circuit and they would go around each town and do their wrestling show. But it was a world which Vince McMahon actually destroyed because it was the old wrestling territory. So all the North America was split up into these territories, and nobody. It was almost like they don't encroach on each other. All the promoters respected each other's boundaries,
Right.
but they also controlled wrestling together as a. It's not like it's almost like a
A
organized.
cartel.
Yeah, yeah, very similar. And I mean, I'm sure some of them were probably criminals. Uh, so Brett grew up. Stu Hart was his father, and all his brothers were wrestlers. But some of the stories about the bus trips and the wrestlers he met in the 60s and 70s, it was just again, it's like you say the book, it takes you to another world, another time that doesn't exist anymore. And just when you were talking about the book, I was that's the exact same feeling I got reading this.
Mhm.
Uh, and then later on in the book, it goes into his more modern, his WWF career, which is much more aware of. And I did enjoy that, but not. It wasn't the part that caught my imagination as much as the early stuff.
Because I think in his early days, and you're talking about them traveling around the sort of little towns and what have you. I mean, I- it's easy to take the piss about wrestling and it being predetermined. Um, but these guys put themselves through, they are the acrobatic skills that they have and the bumps they take and the knocks they take, and they're doing it 5 nights a week and then they're on the road the next day. It's a hell of a life.
Yeah, I mean, they're all working. I mean, the painkillers are all on. So he seems to be avoidable. But there's a guy. So you remember the British Bulldog?
Oh yes, because
So he
one,
was
one of them effectively crippled themselves, didn't they?
yeah. So that's Tom. I think Tom Billingsworth or some Billing does it. So he came out to Stu Hart's Calgary territory. So they all grew up to like came through wrestling. Bret Hart, the British Bulldogs, and Jim the Anvil Knight, they all worked together in Stu Hart's promotion. And then when it got bought over by the WWF, those four went to WWF. But they're all on steroids. They're all taking painkillers to get through the matches because they work injured. Because if they're injured and they can't work, they don't get paid.
Right.
And they all died. Like they're all the British Bulldog, the more famous one. David Boy Smith, he died at about 39 of a heart attack. The other British Bulldog, I can't remember, Tom, who was his cousin.
Billington, I think, was the
That's
name.
it, Tom Billington. Uh, he was crippled, and I'm sure he's passed away now. So it's predetermined, but they put their bodies through so much uh, during the matches, and it's a fascinating world. It's just because there's so much outlandish characters and ridiculousness, but there's
And
also
you've got,
the underworld to it as well, and it is, especially back in the 60s and 70s, it was really the the essentially carnival people. They're traveling around, and they in the book they refer to women as ring rats in both books. So the wrestlers would call the women ring rats, and
yeah,
there was I think there's quite a lot of doubt about the age of a lot of these women that were some of them
yeah,
even women.
yeah,
A lot of them were girls, and it's just a really seedy world, but it's quite a fascinating. It's a world I've got. You've got no. I think it's the juxtaposition of the glitz and the glamour and the showmanship, and then underneath that is this really quite different, different world with people that are not particularly nice.
and you've got the Vince McMahon character who, I mean, I've read some bits and pieces about him over the years, and I can remember, like when you were a kid and Simon was the same age, and you were all really into watching WWE. So yeah, I kind of got sucked into it around about that time. But he was the character he portrayed was a malevolent one. And what you start, as I've read a couple of magazine articles about him, but obviously nothing as in depth as you have, but he kind of ran other wrestling promotions out of business so that he ended up effectively with it all to himself. So the wrestlers, if they fell out with Vince McMahon, then that was the end of their career. So they were having to do things and perform every night or whatever. Otherwise, he'd just cut them off and that was it.
Yeah, so in the 80s, so Vince McMahon bought the WWF off his father.
Mhm.
So his father was a promoter before him. And then, so at that territory system, he then expanded. What he started doing was poaching so like Hulk Hogan. I think
Mhm.
he was in the AW, which was in, I think the Midwest or somewhere. So he bought Hulk Hogan, Roddy Piper, all the big stars from all the territories and he also started buying cable slots and to rival all the territories. So he essentially destroyed um, the territory system. And then the WCW sort of rose up to challenge him. So there was a period in the 90s where there was two competing ones, and he didn't have as much of a grip over the rest of the world. But then he put them out of business as well. But well, maybe he didn't. They went out of business. I don't know if it was just purely because of Vince McMahon. I think there was not very well run organization itself. Fascinating. There's a documentary series on Netflix about Vince McMahon that's really interesting as well because they started filming it and did interviews with him, and then during the filming of the documentary series, all these allegations about him came out.
Right.
So they had to quickly change tact with the documentary series because it was quite a favourable documentary.
Yeah.
But during one of the interviews, he's talking about WCW, and WCW was buying all his in the mid '90s was taking all his wrestlers and paying them more money. And and Vince McMahon's complaining about it in the interview, and then the interviewer says, "But you did that in the '80s," and he performs some sort of mental gymnastics to justify him doing it in the '80s, but not
It's okay
the
when I do it, but not when they do it.
exactly, yeah. And you can see him, and he takes him in and he pauses, and he somehow manages it. But the guy's a complete psychopath, and he could obviously do that and lie to himself and believe it.
I know there've been a couple of wrestlers, well, there've been more than a couple. There's various, you'll see them on YouTube, wrestlers who died young, and there's a lot of them. and probably sort of related to the drugs and things that they were taking. But wasn't there a point where the WWE or WWF or whatever it was at the time created the wellness program, which was supposed to be saying, look, our wrestlers don't take any steroids or any pills or anything else, and then a few months or a year down the line, suddenly somebody else dies and they discover that actually the testing program, the wellness program, isn't as robust as perhaps the PR department has been suggesting it is.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there was a big thing in the early 90s about steroids as well, and Vince McMahon ended up in court for it. And the book goes into it quite a lot. And it was he had a doctor, I think Dr. Zahorian he was called, and he was at all the wrestling shows and he was giving all these drugs to the wrestlers. And I think steroids weren't made illegal until I think they were legal for a lot of the 80s, and it wasn't until the late 80s, maybe early 90s. But then it was an FBI investigation, and Vince McMahon got taken to court. And I think he started clamping down on the use of steroids at that point. And that's when people like Hogan, I'm sure he was in the court case. And again, I think Hank Hogan was meant to testify against him, but he refused to say that Vince McMahon had ever told him to take steroids or something.
It's
So,
quite an it's quite an interesting one if you look at the evolution of wrestling and the point at which the chiseled physique started to become the norm. Whereas if you look back at some old wrestlers from the sort of 60s and 70s, it's kind of just fat old men.
who was the one in Britain who was at Giant Haystacks? Was he not a big, massive
Yeah,
Loch Ness? I think it was called. There
and,
was one
and
called
just
Loch Ness.
and just fell on people because he
Uh,
was too big to actually do anything. But yeah, and then I don't know whether it was the 80s or into that, but certainly that and probably the WWE changed that in that wrestlers suddenly became um
well,
oh,
yeah, that was again, that was the 80s and WWF, and it was so it was a move. So interesting. And so where Bret Hart grew up, it was much more technical. So they were again, it's all fake. It's all predetermined,
predetermined.
predetermined. But Bret Hart, one of the things is, and they were all they prided themselves on making it look as real as possible, and they're very technical, and they could do all these sort of these somersaults and amazing moves. But in the WWF, you had people like Hulk Hogan, and it was much more about the presentation. It wasn't about trying to make it look athletic. It was about these huge 6'7", 6'8" steroided men coming out like superheroes. I remember being a kid and see Hulk Hogan and you're thinking he's this godlike figure, isn't he?
Yes,
But
yes.
there was a period so in the 90s, so the early 90s, when all the steroid scandals was happening and Hulk Hogan disappeared and he came back and he was noticeably a lot less muscled.
Someone
Uh,
had let the air out.
yeah, pretty much, yeah. Uh, so it's yeah, yeah, over the last couple of months, I've just been reading a few books. I read another one by Mick Foley, so Mankind.
Oh, well, yes, I admit. Again, I
So
remember him from the point because didn't he basically have to give up wrestling because, like if he kept doing it, he'd have killed himself.
yeah, so
I mean, fit not chemically, but physically, he
yeah,
because he used to do stupid things like jump off the tops of.
yeah. Well, there's a famous one that's a Hell in a Cell, and the Undertaker threw him off the Hell in the Cell, and he landed on the. It was always the Spanish announce table that he landed on, and then, but they also then he came back up, and the Undertaker choke slammed him, and he wasn't meant to go through the cell the second time, but he actually fell through it. So Mick Foley, yeah, he did a lot. He was like hardcore, but he went out to again. It was like they go to Japan and they did like death matches. And there's one where he got dropped on like a board which had C4 explosives on it, and
Oh, jeez.
so he had and he was his physique. He didn't take steroids.
Yeah,
He wasn't he was quite again. It's like judging it. He's a big man.
yeah.
What normal standing, he would have been about 6'2", well built, but in wrestling that's not huge.
I've heard an interview recently on um, the High Performance podcast, which I think Jake Humphreys does, and they were interviewing the guy I know is Triple H, but Paul was something or other.
Paul
He
Levesque, that's
he's Vince McMahon's son-in-law, I think. And so he was talking about the running the show, and he's now mainly on the sort of management side rather than I don't think he's a performer anymore because he's probably about my age. Um, but he was saying that when things get really stressful in the office and you're having a day when everything seems to be going wrong, he said, I just stand there and I shout, "Hey guys, we're only fighting in our pants." And I thought, that just kind of sums it up in a lovely way. And I thought, if he can look at it that way, then
well, that's
brilliant.
interesting because one of the things I've found the most is the politics in it is fascinating. So that it's all predetermined, but they all, if you, so Triple H was one of the master, he ended up running the company. He's married the boss's daughter. He politicked his way to the top, and they all screw each other over, and they're all trying to, because they all have to get the ear of Vince McMahon, because if they want to win, they can't win on their physical prowess alone because it's predetermined. So that's what I find really fascinating is that they all have to play the game, and Vince McMahon holds so much power over them because he's like, well, if I don't want you to win, I could make you lose every
Mm,
night, and your character's destroyed,
yeah.
your reputation, you're never going to go anywhere in the business. He has complete control over the the outcomes of the matches. So the Paul Levesque, he politicked his way to the top. So I don't think it is just fighting in your pants. There's all this stuff going on underneath it: the drug abuse, the backstabbing, the murders. Like Jimmy Snooker murdered his girlfriend and it got covered up. It's a really dark underbelly to it all, which is
Yes,
fascinating.
and so I suppose when you look at kind of what it is, I mean, I remember years ago, I worked with someone whose wife organised all the travel and accommodation for the WWE when they came to the UK.
Oh yeah.
So they were doing a show at the O2, and Ed's wife got some tickets. So Ed and I went up with another guy from the office who had been a WWE fan since childhood. And he was really, I wouldn't say upset, but really deflated at the end of the evening because when you're watching it live, and we had quite good tickets, so we're quite close to the action. And when you're watching it live, there's no cutaways, there's no camera trickery. So you can actually see somebody throwing a punch and it missing, but the other one goes, "Ugh."
Aye.
And yeah, I remember on the drive back, Mike was sort of quite crestfallen because, even though by that time he was probably late 20s, early 30s, somewhere in his mind he still actually believed that this was real. So,
Well, that was, I mean, that's it. It's quite interesting because I don't want, I mean, I've not watched like wrestling for years, like since I was a teenager. But it's the nostalgia of it for me. I think it's
yeah.
why I'm getting back into because it's so it gets, again, there's all these conflicting emotions when I'm reading it because as I say, it's really dark and horrible
Yeah.
people and things are going on. But there's something quite warm and fuzzy about remembering all this stuff from my childhood as I'm reading it. Um,
I,
but I
I
used
remember, I remember on one occasion, just after we got um, Sky, I remember Simon was desperate to watch WrestleMania or something, and it
yeah.
was on from 2 in the morning till 5 or something, and we actually bought the pay-per-view and actually watched it. So you got up in the early hours and we
You'd
watched
have told
it.
me I would have came down to watch that if I'd known you because I remember me and Cameron because we never had Sky growing up. Um, and we used to get our friends to record it for us because we did have it, so they would just record it. There's a couple of funny stories because remember there's one WrestleMania we got recorded and it must have been '99, and everybody had watched it and we hadn't, so we were desperate to get this video to watch it. And a friend gave us it, and or Cammy's friend gave us it, but he'd recorded it in long play, and we only had a short play video recorder.
Oh
We put it
no.
on, and it was the end of the world because we couldn't we couldn't watch it. So we ended up buying me and him. We had a bit of money, so, for house, for pocket money saved up. So we were desperate. So we got driven to Falkirk the next day so we could buy a a long play video recorder just so we could watch WrestleMania. And then there was another time we were watching it, and you could set the video recorder to record and go to bed.
Mhm.
So his friend had done that for us, and then I don't there was these things called 10-minute teasers that used to get on cable TV, and it was like softcore pornography. So so he'd set it, and one of these 10-minute teasers came on after the wrestling. But me and Cameron were sitting watching it in the living room, and it happened. My nana was there and my mum. And I could just remember that it finished, and then we were just chatting, and then suddenly these two lesbians are covered in paint in the shower, and I can't remember, I'm sure. I think my mum and my nana were convinced that that was just the wrestling was just camouflage for us all to be sending softcore pornography to each other.
And one of those situations nobody's quite sure what to do, and everybody's shuffling about. And
Yeah. It was quite interesting. As I started talking about that, I actually could remember that was actually a part of that Jack and Simon novel. I'd actually written that entire bit into it. That was like they're reminiscing, they're talking, and that's one of the things they talk about is that the sharing of videos and that actual story. I think I might have actually put that in a novel
I
or,
like that.
or a chapter, a half-written chapter of an unfinished novel, shall we say?
I down here, I met up with a guy who runs. I suppose talking about what the Hearts did originally with, but he runs a wrestling promotion which does two or three shows a year, in and around Hastings, and he's been fascinating to chat to. Um, and he kind of campaigns hard again because obviously the nature of what these people are doing, abuse, be it physical or sexual, is quite easy to kind of pass off as kind of what's norm. So yeah, no, this guy Stuart, he is kind of at the forefront of campaigning to clean up the wrestling industry in the UK, and he will name and shame those he believes aren't behaving quite appropriately. So
Yeah.
yeah, interesting world, um, which yeah.
As I say, yeah, it's when you get. I always find that sometimes you read one book and then you just spiral and you get into that topic. I've done it before with like the Roman Empire,
Yep.
or French Revolution, and it tends to be more non-fiction that this happened because you'll read a novel and it's unless it's a part of a series, you can't really continue reading that.
But
Uh,
but isn't that the joy of books? That when you're reading something, you come to something in the story that will take you off. I mean, going back to Francis Carlin's ex-detective book, when I was reading that, it made me realise that no women. He's not talking about police women, which led me to go and look up when we actually first had female police officers, and that's kind of the joy of reading and the joy of books, which I don't think we get through the internet. Because through the internet, if you're wanting information about something, and especially with Chat GPT now, you get a relatively short answer, which you basically is the answer to the question you asked. But it doesn't give you extra information, which kind of sends you off in another direction or wanting to find out about something else. And I think that's one of the great joys of books because they do that.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, it
it
builds on
leads you
itself,
into
and
the subject
like
matter.
a lot of the time I've gone into like you get into a topic, and I've read a fictional book, and then and it's set in a period like like or even your book's not fiction, it's non-fiction, isn't it? It's
Yes. Yeah.
but like I've read, I was looking for before Hilary Mantel's A Place of Greater Safety, which is
Mhm.
set during the French Revolution, and I studied the French Revolution at uni, but I never really got into it. And then I read this novel, and the characters, the people, it made me want to read more. So I ended up buying biographies of
Mhm.
Robespierre and Danton and all these French revolutionaries, and it's a period of history, a period that I really enjoy, and I go back to it every so often and read another couple of books.
Yep.
And that all came from. reading one historical novel. And then I think there's another example was again I've talked about before is the Robert Harris books, the Cicero trilogy, and then that sparked an interest in the fall of the Roman Republic. And again, that's another book that I've read biographies of Cicero and Julius Caesar, and I think Tom Holland wrote a book that I've read.
Yeah.
You know, do you ever listen to the rest is history?
I don't. Rest is politics, yes. Rest is entertainment, yes. But I haven't got. It's one of those ones that I keep meaning to get to, but I listen to so many podcasts that squeezing another one in
They might
is.
be good because they did one on Jack. They did a series on Jack the Ripper recently, so that could tie in with the.
It was,
Because
yeah.
I'm sure because does he write anything about Jack the Ripper?
He doesn't know. My Jack
That
the
was one of the
Ripper.
ones that got one of the criminals that got away, so he doesn't know.
Yeah,
So
yeah, which is why he doesn't write about him. My other book that I was wanting to talk about, kind of, it's called Not Another Inspirational Story. It's self-published by a man I met. Uh, One of my Christmas presents this year was a day at a cookery school, and uh, Jay, who wrote this book, was there, and he arrived in his wheelchair. And he talks in the book about how when people see him arriving in a wheelchair, they make assumptions like, oh, well, he must have been paralyzed since birth. Um, and we got chatting during the course of the day. And of course, we ended up taking, everybody took photographs of all the food that we'd cooked and all the stuff we were doing. And then we all swapped those at the end of the day. And through WhatsApp, Jay and I ended up chatting. And we were sort of talking about his disability, and he said he'd written the book, and I went onto Amazon and I bought it, and he calls it not another inspirational story because he doesn't see what he went through and what he did as being particularly inspiring, but he was, I think, early 30s, went to the gym one Friday morning planning his weekend. Um, had got sort of kind of into competitive weightlifting and what have you, training for a competition. And he went to do a particular kind of lift where you kind of push the bar, you bring the bar halfway up, then you push it above your head. And he says in the book, he felt unstable and felt the bar wasn't, was starting to go. So dropped it behind him, which is, I've heard and I've seen people doing that. It's, again, from the book, it's kind of how if you think you have trouble, that's how you get out of it. But basically, as the bar came down and he kind of stumbled forward, it hit him across his sort of upper back. And
because you're kind of leaning forward when you're lifting as well, aren't
yeah,
you?
so, and basically, so broke his back. Um, and he recounts the story in the book. And he recounts the story from the morning the accident happened through about a couple of years as he rehabilitated as much as he could, sort of moved back into kind of normal life. And it is he might not want it to be, but it is an inspirational story. And again, it's the kind of thing that books do so well. And it fits, actually fits his podcast quite well because he was a bit of a frustrated author in terms of um, getting it written, getting it out there. As he self-published it, my only criticism is it could have done with a bit more of a thorough proofreading. Um, but that's being a bit churlish. But there's some things in it that amaze me, like how quickly again, we look at television and we look at programs about people in hospital, and you think when someone's injured like that, they're in a coma, they're completely out of it for days, weeks, whatever. But kind of within 24 hours, he was, fully awake, fully conscious, in a lot of pain, and kind of aware of everything that was going on around him. Hearing the discussions. He talks about one young doctor um, who he heard rather bluntly saying, "Oh, well, he'll never walk again," in a kind of dismissive tone. And then he takes you through the characters he met who were in similar circumstances to himself, the the hierarchy of spinal injuries. So his is quite high up. So I think it's the sort of thoracic area. But apparently, if you've got a fracture of your spine in the lumbar region, so it's an L4 rather than apparently the more seriously spinal injured, and yes, that's nothing. Um, he talks about the things that pulled him through, and in the early stages when he was in hospital, he wanted to attend his sister. He wanted to be there at his sister's wedding, and all his focus was on getting to his sister's wedding. He wrote a list of things that he wanted to achieve. And as we go through the book, the list is kind of published again with a few more things struck off. And one of the key things he wanted was to be able to pick up his son, who, when he had the accident, was only about 7 or 8 months old. Um, and it's just, as I say, I was really taken by it. I suppose knowing the guy himself and sort of seeing how grounded he is, or appears to be. I've only met him on one occasion, but how grounded he seems to be, and what comes over in the book is how well he has adjusted. I mean, he still talks about times that are very black, but yeah. And again, I just as we were talking about things that books do well, it's great, and I just think he tells the story. He's incredibly open about the effects that paralysis has in his life. Um, yeah, it's a great read. It is a thoroughly good read.
And
Uh,
that was just by chance that you met him once. And
yeah, as I say, we were doing this cookery course together, and yeah, I know of the cover of the book has got the wheelchair with the buggy
oh,
attached.
the pram there, yeah.
Yeah, and it was about all of for him. It was about all those little steps. It's probably a bad choice of words, but making the progress, ticking off the list that he'd done. So he had dressed himself, or um, he talked about self-catheterizing and things like that.
I can
Um,
imagine that the writing of the book itself must have been a kind of a process that helped him. Was he writing it as he was healing, or did he write it afterwards?
no, he wrote it afterwards,
Hmm.
um, and so I suppose he's got a little bit of perspective on it. But he talks about the nurses and the doctors, good and bad, the fellow patients, good and bad. There was the guy who was in a similar condition to himself that he struck up a really good friendship with. And then one day this guy was gone, had been moved to, I think, another hospital, and never saw or heard from him again, which he took quite bad. He took it hard because as he thought they had some kind of enduring relationship, a friendship, because of kind of the shared.
Is it available on? Can you buy? Where can you buy it?
It's available on Amazon,
I'll need to have a look
and
for it.
and it's not expensive. Both available both as hard copy and as a Kindle version. So yeah, as I say, I liked it, and I think again, it's the stuff that books do, that writing does, that allows you to sit and read and sort of take something in. And I think we've talked before about the kind of modern world that we have, where everything is bam, 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 bam. It's headline, headline, headline. Weightlifter breaks back, and but it's the story behind.
Yeah,
Um,
it allows you to, it's experience it obviously firsthand. Allows you to experience other people's
yep,
worlds and the things that they endure and things that
yep,
you'll never experience yourself, and having some sort of perspective on it.
yep,
Because the Bret Hart, oh, but it's quite again, it's like we've not planned this at all, but Bret Hart suffered a really serious concussion in a match, and then he goes into the details. And I've never had a concussion, so he goes into quite a lot of detail about his life after the concussion and walking about and for months in excruciating pain, and how he just sort of got on with it, and he kept wrestling for a while, but he eventually got to the point where the doctors were saying you can't wrestle anymore because you'll kill yourself. So he had to quit. He had to give up, and then he lost his multi-million-pound contract. He was at WCW. They dropped him, and then a year or so after that, he was cycling, and he was sort of getting. It took him a long time to recover from the concussion. And he was cycling in Calgary, and he went off the path to go for a pee. Then he hit a bump and fell down, and he banged his head and had a stroke. And he was quite a young man. He was only
yep.
in his 40s. And then he goes into, there's a whole chapter about him in hospital with his stroke and having to, the physiotherapy he was getting to recover from the stroke. And it's tragic because he was a man that was an incredible, he was
Mm,
an athlete.
yep,
And to go from an athlete to someone that can barely walk within the space of a couple of years,
yep.
it's really quite jarring change. And he talks about how he got through it, and he started writing. That's why he started writing his autobiography. Was after he had his stroke, and after once he kind of recovered enough, he started. His career was over. His marriage was over. He was in a very dark place. His brother had died. Like both his parents had died all within a space of like 2 or 3 years. And
Wow.
so he started writing his autobiography. And that's from a writing point of view. I think that's one of the things that writing can do for you is that it's I don't want to use the word therapy because I know
What
you're old school and you don't like get in touch with emotional, but
have you ever?
there's a cathartic element to writing. I think you've got something inside and you
That was the
write.
word I was. That cathartic was the word I was struggling not to use.
Oh, is it? Why not? Why do you not like the word cathartic?
Well, it's a lovely word, but it's just overused these days. Yeah.
Another word I think is overused is elevate. Everything's
Yes.
elevated.
Yeah.
What word would you use instead of cathartic? Put your editor hat on. What would you?
Oh God. Yeah.
We're putting you on the spot here.
I don't know. It was a cathartic experience, life-changing experience. It was a revelatory experience. I don't know.
Revelatory is too
Too romantic.
grandiose.
Perhaps it sounds a bit
Too,
too romantic as well.
too. It's also like too. I think revelatory feels a bit more spiritual.
Yes, yeah, yeah, a touch of religion. I'll go and I'll dial up the thesaurus on my phone and get back to you on that
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
I should find out more about AI, but I just
I don't bother. It's quite interesting though. You can there's a again styles of writing. There's an AI style of writing, and once you notice it, you can spot everything that's written by AI.
just to round this one up. Have you done any writing recently?
I'm trying to think.
I
I
can
don't think
tell
so.
what this answer's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I have been incredibly busy, and
Of course you have, Richard.
yeah,
You've had a new car to drive around in.
exactly. New car. I've been working a lot. Um, I haven't actually done any writing. I think it was quite. I was walking when I was out because it's really sunny day today, so I was out for a walk after taking the car. Drove the car up to a nice woody like kind of woods up the back of Falkirk. And I went for a walk, and I think just the act of walking, you start. And I left my phone in the car as well, so I don't have my phone to distract me. And just it takes about 20 minutes, and then your mind just starts drifting off into to ideas. But I generally just it's not having that. Can, I've talked about it before. It's just you'll start something and then you can't look at it for 2 weeks. You sit back down and you've forgotten the inspiration for it, and
I
that's
I had I had a
and
phase, and I think it was early January, and I wrote quite a lot. In a fiction sense, I wrote quite a lot, and I was kind of on a roll, and then something happened, and again had a 10 days, couple of weeks where I didn't look at it, and then you go back and you kind of lost the thread. You could have, and I remember, as we talked about before, that I did write a 100,000 word novel, and I think we published some of that on our Substack. But I remember when I was doing that, I had such enthusiasm for the characters, such enthusiasm for the story that it kind of forced you back to doing it. And I think, and I think possibly you're in the same position, that we haven't yet found characters or people or a situation that we have enough passion for that drives us back and back and back to keep it going.
Yeah. And I find as well, so the last thing I did try to write, I think we talked about it the last podcast, and it was I'd written something about a guy on a train. I can't remember if I did talk about it, maybe I didn't. But then I always find I end up with the same dynamic of it's two male. So he meets a guy on the train and something, they get chatting. I can't remember, and I didn't really even got that far. And then they sort of go off. But it's always like the narrator who's essentially me, and then some oddball friend that he's got that's that's
The
my
same thing
neurotic,
about what you know.
yeah, it's my neurotic side. Um, and then there's always the same dynamic. So I think I'm just it's like the setting changes and the characters are maybe a bit older, but I'm essentially rewriting the same thing over and over again.
Yeah,
So I need to. But then there was one thing, yeah, what it is. I think you're right. It's like finding the inspiration, but then you get inspired, and then life gets in the way.
yeah, yeah. No,
So
it
at the back of my mind, I've kind of thinking I will at some point take a big chunk of time off and just try and write something, but I can't do that now because I've just bought a new car, so I need to pay for it.
I have this notion that every morning I will spend from 9 till 10:30 or 10:30 till 12 or something, and that I'll set aside that time to do some writing, and it doesn't happen.
That's it. You're retired. You've got no excuses.
Well, I think, as I've said before, I'm doing, my Substack's progressing quite well. Published my 102nd um, piece today, and I did I've avoided politics thus far, but I ended up doing a piece on the local elections the other day, and that's got quite good feedback and quite good engagement. So yeah, I'm doing quite a bit of that, but yeah, it's still that thing, your dad wrote fiction, so why can't I?
Yeah. But a different world, less distractions.
Exactly. Yeah, there's no Tinternet.
No.
I,
Aye.
I do admire your resolve and your ability to push that away. Um, it's something I would love to do, but yeah, I used the term doom scrolling to somebody recently. They said, "Oh, what are you doing?" I said, "I'm just doom scrolling," and they'd never heard the term, but it's incredibly appropriate because you do find you're rolling through TikTok and you are watching rubbish.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this thing, like, I've got rid of, like, like, all the kind of main social medias like
Yeah.
Instagram.
Plus,
But
it brings us back to what books, as I was saying about this one, what books do well. Um, and there's something calming and relaxing about slowing down and sitting down and reading a book, which you don't get when you try and read a book
aye.
on one of those.
Yeah, just it's shutting off and focusing on one thing.
Yes.
Shutting out all
Because
the
the problem is if you
distractions.
try to read a book or try to read a magazine or whatever on your iPad, it's beeping at you all the time because here's another email has arrived and here's another WhatsApp message. Here's a notification from the Telegraph. Here's a notification. So it disturbs the rhythm of reading,
Mhm.
which is why I've mentioned before, I've tried to stop reading books on my iPad and go back to having physical books. One
which
thing
is
I think they're nice to touch, but also you get it's just it's more relaxing.
which is interesting because when we first started doing the podcast, you were mocking me for still reading
I
paper books.
know, I know,
So I've
I
been
know.
a intergenerational influence the other way, and influence my younger. But
Yeah,
that's what it is. It's yeah, and it's about just put. But I also think one last thing about like creativity and how like and it feels like there's not as many like good films come out anymore. And I don't know if it's just me getting older. So I'm sure every generation thinks that the next generation's not as creative. But I do feel like there's a tangible difference in the quality of art that's produced by society now, like Western culture, like music is all like there's still good music comes out, but if you compare the charts in the 60s and 70s to now, like
yeah,
imagine the charts in the take a random week in the 60s and it'd be Bob Dylan, the Beatles,
yeah.
and then films just doesn't seem to be that same filmmaking skill, and I wonder how much of it is as we're now fully into the digital age, how much phones and technology is stifling creative. Like if you look at us, like I've never actually written anything because I get distracted all the time. And it's like how many other people that could have written a novel
I get
aren't doing it because they're glued to the phone watching AI YouTube videos.
yeah. And I think the other thing you're talking about films, the because of all the streaming services and all the streaming services having to have content, we're making very generic films. You know, the old notion of the chick flick, which you kind of had, all the chick flicks you've seen in the rom-coms that you've seen, they've all kind of got the same structure. You know, boy meets girl, boy hates girl, something happens and boy falls in love with girl. Um, then, but three-quarters of the way through, they have some kind of falling out after they were planning to get married. Then, right at the end, she goes off somewhere and he chases after her, and everybody lives happily ever after. Um, but you weren't making lots of them, whereas now they're churning them out for Netflix, and it's like production line stuff. And you watch a film or you start to watch a film, you think, oh, that's the same as, you know, and list 10 films that it's the same as. So finding a really good film or something that's different. Um, what was the film that came out a couple of years ago about the university students, which had a great cast, um, and was worth watching. But so much of what turns up in Netflix, in fact, I'm thinking of cancelling our Netflix subscription because it's just so much rubbish on it.
Yeah, aye,
Um,
and yeah, even the way things look now. So I watched the Malcolm in the Middle reunion,
mhm.
and I thought it was okay. It was good. Like it was good to watch. Like some people don't like it, but the I went back to watch the old ones now because I've not watched Malcolm in a long time, and I used to love it when I was a kid. And like the sets are so different, and everything's so much cleaner. And I also think like high definition TV and film isn't. I don't think it necessarily makes things better. Like being able to see because an element of everything looks so clear, crisp
Yep,
that lose. I feel like with some films, like I've been watching a lot of 90s films, and the tone and the lighting is so different and so much it draws you in so much more
yep,
than now. Everything looks really clean and polished and unrealistic.
yep. Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, and everybody looks too, yeah, everybody looks too perfect and everything
uh,
looks too perfect. Although talking of modern TV, well, actually, it's not that modern. I think it was made in 2009, 10, and 11. We've just finished watching a series. It was on Channel 4 catch up called Revenge, um, which was 4 seasons and 90 episodes. But it was like, again, you won't remember Dallas and Dynasty, but it was like Dallas and Dynasty on steroids. Um, and
I mean,
it
I know what Dallas. I know like Dallas was JR, wasn't it? And
yes,
JR.
it just became compulsive watching. Supposedly based in the Count of Monte Cristo, but I struggled to see that link, to be honest with you.